Yeah, and again, we're recording because we know y'all are going to want this recording later. We're so glad you're here. I always say you could be doing a million other things tonight, but you chose to stare at your computer in community with us. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. And you might be alone in your room like me, but know that there are presently pretty much 1,000 people here with us in community. So we are here together tonight, and I'm so grateful you joined us. So starting off, my name is Grace. My pronouns are she and her. I'm calling in tonight from traditional Mohican land, now currently stewarded by the Schaghticoke Nation. And I'm the communications director here at Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURJ, as we call it in the family. We like to do image descriptions when we're on Zoom to make the space more accessible to blind and low sight folks. So I am a racially ambiguous queer 10 with shoulder length dark hair and a blonde streak, a pop and pink lip, and a teal shirt. I'm an Asian American woman who believes deeply in the need to organize white people, which is why I'm here at SURJ. Some Zoom logistics. I know we live here now. Many of us live on Zoom, but still bears repeating. Here at SURJ, we have a commitment to disability justice and access in our work. So you can already see my dear friend Jennifer next to me, who is a part of our sign language team, and she and Norma will be doing live ASL interpretation throughout the call, and they'll be spotlighted, which means their video will be nice and big for you to see their incredible interpretations. We're also joined tonight by Monica, who's offering live captions. If you're on Zoom, you can view the live captions or a transcript by clicking the CC icon in the bottom bar of your Zoom window and selecting show subtitle or view full transcript. And if you're on Facebook, you can see the live transcript by clicking the stream text link that is going to be shared in the comments. Also, everybody always wants a recording. This is going to be amazing. You're going to want to watch it again with your mom. So you'll be getting, anybody that registered will be getting a recording of this, plus any links and info that the speakers mentioned throughout the call. You'll get that in your email. If you have tech issues throughout the call, please feel free to chat. The panelists and the hosts and our tech leads can help you out. Speaking of the chat is popping. It's still going fast. You guys are doing amazing. However, we are going to turn the chat off during the conversation because it can be distracting and just sort of spread like wildfire. So that'll be off, but then we'll turn it back on at the end so that you can love on our speakers and say how amazing and inspired you are, or how amazing they are and how inspired you are. Okay, so penultimate, second to last part of our logistics tonight, I want to talk about Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURJ, who is hosting the call tonight and is the place where I've made my movement home. At SURJ, because some of you I know are SURJ members, please shout out if you're a SURJ member or a chapter member in the chat. But for some of you, this is your first time hanging out in a SURJ space. So by way of introduction, at SURJ, we organize white people into fights for justice. And we do this work, number one, because it's strategic. We know that those who benefit from the status quo, corporate politicians, the far right, elites, work really freaking hard to make sure that white people blame people of color for their problems rather than those at the top, because they know, in the words of my dear comrade Beth Howard, that if we all stood together, when working people of all races stood together, those at the top would be screwed. So at SURJ, we work to give people a better option than white supremacy and bring white communities into multiracial fights for justice. Okay, so that's the strategic part. We organize white people because it's strategic, but also, per the topic of this webinar, in my words, we organize white people because white people have a sacred and vocational contribution to the movement. We are here tonight, y'all, because the right is really good at talking to white people using their bullshit lies. And organizing other white people means breaking the right's power at the very source they're relying on and bringing those folks into a political home of care and belonging and solidarity. So that's SURJ. That's the work we do. If you've been looking for a political home in these times, in these wild times, welcome. We want you on our team and you're right on time. Okay, so those are the logistics for the night. And I'm going to close this opening section by inviting you to join me in one of our collective movement superpowers that I know AMB appreciates too, which is singing together, which we can do in Zoom across time and space. So this song is by a movement folk singer who also happens to be my best friend, Claire Hitchens. Say hey in the chat, Claire, I think you're here. And the lyrics are simple. We are whole, we are holy, we are holding one another. And I believe this to be true this night and every night. So I'll sing it a few times through, and I'll invite you to join me in your little corner of the world to drop into your body, to drop into the sacred vocation that you hold as a part of this movement. And also know that you might be singing alone in your apartment, but your one small voice is contributing to this great choir of now 1,149 people, plus whoever is on Facebook, probably a lot. Your voice is contributing to this great choir of multitudes that is holding us all in this moment. So it goes like this. I know y'all are singing with me. We are whole. We are holy. We are holding one another. We are whole. We are holy. We are holding one another. We are whole. We are holy. We are holding one another. Tonight we are whole, we are holy, we are holding one another in this space. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here with us. We're so glad you're here. And now I'm going to pass it over to my sister friend, my Nazi fighting dreamsicle comrade, Hillary Moore.
Thank you, Grace. I feel like Grace just set the table. You know, we're going to be eating some delicious food here. We're in really good company, and we're going to talk about some important things together. So thank you, Grace, and really thank you to the whole crew behind the scenes making this possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're here, why the context, and y'all can also fill in, use the chat, or I guess you can't, but you can imagine. The spark for the webinar came out of recent public stirrings about cancel culture, right? Which of course raised a lot of questions and concerns about the culture of left social movements. And for sure, we're going to talk about cancel culture, and for sure, we're going to talk about what else is possible. We're going to talk about specific kinds of things we can practice that build the culture we need to win, right? The culture we need to keep our folks safe, the culture we need to build powerful social justice movements. We're going to talk about that tonight. And before that, we got to get real about the context that we're living in and put cancel culture within context, social context, political context. And it's hard to think of anybody else, in my humble opinion, who can do that better than our movement ancestor, Grace Lee Boggs. If you don't know who Grace Lee Boggs is, open up another tab, search, read, devour, change. Grace Lee Boggs was a revolutionary, an organizer, an author, Adrian's a mentor. So she's very much here with us. And she often asks, what time is it on the clock of the world? What is happening right now? And how ought we be using our life force with our limited time here? So it's really big arc kind of thinking, and that's what we're up to tonight. One time I was in a training and she Skyped in, this was like Skype time. She Skyped into that training to talk about her answer to that question. What time is it on the clock of the world? And her answer was, we need to grow our souls. So I want to pause here, take a moment. One, send some gratitude to movement ancestor Grace Lee Boggs. Thank you, right? And either take a note for yourself or text a friend. But what is your answer to that question, right? How do you relate to that question? What does it mean at this moment on the clock of the world? Think about it, reflect. I also want to say that I've heard Dr. Robin D.G. Kelley say it's 11:59 and 59 seconds, right? And I think now more than ever, more people in the global north and in the States are starting to understand what Dr. Kelley is pointing to. And it's like that visceral knowledge that we're at a precipice. And people put different words to it. Some call it collapse, some call it mounting authoritarianism, some call it the fascist creep. And there's many examples about this. I'll point to just a few, right? The rollback on abortion rights and criminalizing those who make that access more possible. Or the white man who massacred 10 Black folks at Tops grocery store and an entire community in Buffalo. Also, systemic attacks on voting rights that hack away at what organized Black communities have won. Militarized border policies that kill people here in the States, in Europe, and Palestine. Or the fact that almost 70%, this is wild, 70% of the world's people now live under an autocracy or an authoritarian regime where repression is normal. So these are just a few examples. And why I'm raising this is that all of this points to one hand on that clock, right? And ultimately, what I'm offering is I think that that hand indicates that those who are committed to the politics and practice of domination, Suzanne Farr's interpretation of domination politics, those motherfuckers are doubling down. They're doubling down on their tactics to secure their power, whether it's real or perceived, at every level, and through the use of violence and repression. And if you're like, what? I need to know more about these threats that we face. Awesome, go to the Surge webinar. There's literally a webinar we did with Matthew Lyons and Rachel Herzing about the threats that we face. P.S. We could do another webinar about that because that's unending. So I invite you to take a breath because we're human and we need oxygen. And I want to point us to the very real and yes, worsening conditions we're in, because we cannot hide, ignore, or get smaller in the face of them. And we're going to talk about the Jedi move here tonight. It's a Jedi move to get really present with what is and see clearly and grow our analysis. And at the same time, dare to imagine something else and then put that shit into practice. And spoiler alert, it means coming together in some pretty important ways. So that's tonight. That's what we're up to. We're going to talk about what's really going on, the context for call out culture, cancel culture, where we go from here. And because this is a question that Surge is taking on, what is the particular role of white folks at this moment? I get the honor of introducing some special ass people, myself included. Okay, so my name is Hillary Moore. I use she and they pronouns. I'm a white working class lady with orange hair, pink lips, sitting in front of a turquoise wall. I'm a political educator, organizer, and author. I live on unceded Osage, Shawnee, and Cherokee territory, also known as Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm the director of people and culture at Surge. And now I get to introduce my friends. I want to introduce you to Adrienne Maree Brown, my friend, my comrade, my fellow teacher, brilliant playwright, author extraordinaire, philosophizer and alchemist of transformation, Black liberation practitioner, operatic song singer. This is clearly my bio for my friends. Best breakfast bagel ever made maker, and champion of love in all of its teachings. If you don't know Adrienne Maree Brown's other work and writings and like brilliance, welcome and Google her. And let's bring on Erin Heaney, who is also a dear friend and a comrade, also my boss, executive director at Surge, descendant of Irish revolutionaries, strategist and builder of organizations, ride or die for Buffalo, New York, the king of cozy sweatshirts, top 3 most passionate karaoke singers I've ever seen because Earl had to die. And those are the folks that we're rolling with tonight. And so let's get into discussion. I'm really holding this as a conversation amongst all of us, as well as a casual conversation between people who organize their longings, their gifts, their actions around liberation. So to kick off, I want to ask my 2 comrades a question, which is, what is a superpower you have that's equipping you to face this moment right now? And let's go to you, Adrienne.
First of all, I love you so much, Hillary. I love doing panels with friends. You get the best bios that way. I am a Black mixed race woman in a tank top dress, turquoise and pink glasses against a wall that the color is called splashy, but it's like teal with an Octavia Butler shrine over my shoulder. And I am speaking to you from the land of the Shakori, Skarura, Tuscarora, and Lumbee peoples. And my superpower that is helping me right now, I think it's channeling the truth. Like, I really think that it's just like, oh, this is what is. And so I feel like I don't spend a lot of time on like, how is this what is? I'm just like, this is what is. And that it cuts through a lot to be able to be like, well, since this is what is now what do we do? And it helps me a lot. How about you, Erin?
So glad to be here with the thousands of y'all tonight and with you, Adrienne and Hillary. I like second the like that was the most amazing bio ever. Yep. So my name is Erin Heaney. My pronouns are she and her. And I, as Hillary said, hail from Buffalo, which is Haudenosaunee land. And I'm a white woman with shoulder length brown hair and a gray tank top. In kind of a beige rental property. That's not my home. And yeah, and I feel like a superpower that I am bringing in this moment is like the capacity to stay in motion and stay in action while being in contradiction, right? I think one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is like organizing white people for racial justice, and that is a contradiction. And I think I've got the capacity to stay in motion and in action, which is, you know, a lot of what we need to be doing right now, while holding that I have like deep love for my people and also know that my people are causing great harm. I can hold that like my people are a huge part of the problem and also part of the solution. And so, yeah, and I feel like I can stay in emotion through that. And I've been told that's a superpower, so I'm going with it.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I'll throw in too. I feel like my superpower is I can always find or refine the part of me that knows that life is precious and worthy of fighting for in its many different forms, whether it's my own or my folks and the people that we're committed to. And that's not nothing in these times, I think. So,
Clutch.
Ooh, this is delicious. Okay, let's dig in, y'all. We all know about call out culture. No surprises here. It's kind of a buzzword now. But let's get deeper around it, right? There's a lot of surface level discussion about it. Adrienne, you wrote a fucking book. Sorry, I curse a lot. What is it really? So first question, what is it really? What is it attempting to take care of? And what are the costs? And let's start with you, Adrienne.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always want to say, like, I think when it started, I think the roots of it are Black and Brown and Indigenous roots, and they're really direct action roots. Like, there's a root of saying, like, there's something really egregious and harmful happening and it needs to stop. And it was a strategy that was developed for communicating across a distance that was immensely far, where there was a massive power imbalance, right? So it's like this massive corporation is trying to do something to destroy our community. We're calling you out, right? This massive corporation is withholding the drugs that our community needs for AIDS work. We're calling it out. And it's an incredible and very effective strategy in that context. And I love it still as like my favorite thing to do to institutions is be like, I'm calling you out. You're an asshole. We don't have a relationship. And there's no way for me to get a relationship with you. This is how I'm going to do this work. But I think what has happened inside of particularly movement culture, and I want to delineate that because I'm like, I think people are like, yeah, in Hollywood, in this and that. I'm like, I can't speak about everybody in Hollywood, because those people have not committed themselves to being on a path of liberation and justice. I want to speak to in a space where we are saying we are committed to building the new world. We are committed to figuring out a way to coexist. We are committed to modeling something for our people that is different than what exists right now. In that space, call out culture, I think, has become really dangerous. Yeah, I can turn up my volume. Let me also check on what my microphone is. Because I can go off Is that better?
Ooh, yeah.
Is that too much better? Is it like way better? Like too
No,
loud?
it's like
It's good.
sexy podcast voice. Like,
Yeah,
keep
this
it
is
on.
my podcast mic.
Here
All right, y'all. This is how the magic happens.
we
So,
go.
was it bad enough that I should repeat, or like we're good? We're good. Okay, so I think what's happening inside of movement spaces where people are committed to liberation and justice and building something else is that we've started using it as this lateral strategy where we could call, right? Like every time I hear people say call out, call in, I'm like, but did you call first? Like, did you actually reach out? Did you have the difficult conversation? Was it organizational, an organizational conflict that was needed to happen? Is there a contradiction in place that actually maybe you just were in that contradiction 2 years ago and now you've outgrown that contradiction, you're calling out someone else who's in it. It's being used to create these massive divisions, and I think the problem, I was like, if it was working, I would be so into it still, probably. Or I'm like, yeah, shame them. Shit, let's get this together. But it's not working. It's like people kind of disappear, they reappear somewhere else like a whack-a-mole. The behavior that we need to actually be shining a light on and being like, hey, these are the mistakes we want to change. This is what we want to evolve. Instead, people are like trying to hide them. And it really serves our opposition because we're dividing. So we make our numbers smaller and smaller and smaller. At the moment, we most need them to be bigger and bigger. So we end up divided, we end up ashamed, we end up contentious, we end up insecure. People don't feel like they can make a mistake. And that's the worst place for humans to be because we're a fucking mess. We're making mistakes all the time. So, like, I made mistakes today. You won't believe it, but it did happen. So I just feel like it's really shattering our capacity to belong. And I think what we'll get into this for whiteness, but I'm like, whiteness as a project in some way is like about belonging. And it's about both who gets to belong and who doesn't get to belong. And we're all in a response to that, like, yeah, where do we belong? How do we belong? And then we have this strategy that makes it like you can only belong here unless you never make a mistake, right? That's not going to work. Everyone's just ashamed and alone, and we're losing. That's what I think.
All right. Erin, what you got?
I'll just keep building on that as a human who also made mistakes today and makes mistakes constantly. I think in particular, and I want to, maybe I'll speak to like, as someone who is a white person organizing other white people and some of the particular dynamics that come up in white anti-racist space, which are not unique to us, and they can be quite intense in our own unique flavor sometimes. I think what I see that behavior serving, in addition to what Adrienne named, is also, it's like trying to take care of our own dignity. Like we are trying, like what I see happening is like there's really intense blend of things going on when white folks are calling other white folks out around racism. There's like, we are afraid, we are full of shame, we are full of rage because we feel like we've been lied to our whole lives, especially when we're first coming into consciousness about race. And so I think there's a desire to like want to release the guilt and the shame. These are normal things. We want to get rid of it. We want to distance ourselves from it, right? We're like, that is not me. Yeah. And I think if we can point the finger at someone else, then it makes us less complicit and it makes us good and them bad. Like we're the good white people and they're the bad white people. And that plays into that division that Adrienne's talking about, right? Which is like at the very moment we need to get big, right? Like movement is getting more of us in motion and in movement is like the only thing that is going to be able to prevent us from going to some of the scarier places that Hillary said we're going towards. And I think it's just like, it's the only move we have sometimes. It's the only move that we're practiced in. It's the only move that we've seen modeled sometimes. And so it's the thing that we do because we don't have a lot of other great models and we don't have a lot of practice. Yeah. And I think for some of us, a more generous interpretation might be like, for some of us, it's the first who are white. It's like our first move at saying like, I'm not participating in this anymore. It's like our first move, and that's not a bad thing. It's just not the thing that's going to get us where we need to go in this moment. And it's not just new folks. That's the thing I want to say. It can also show up in those of us who have been in movement for a real long time. So, yeah.
Reach. Also that wear downness. That's an easy move when you feel like you've been in for a long time and it's been hard. And I also want to pull out something that y'all pointed to is like our need to get really big, right? And like how this move doesn't take care of that. And I also want to situate it within like 2020 uprisings when we were fucking huge. We were global. People recognizing and like resounding off of each other and feeling and having impact that maybe some of us have never experienced before. And then to have that met with such repression, such intense repression. And I feel like the gap in between is our grief that we haven't really dealt with, right? And maybe that's where our grief lives. And what's so sad about grief, especially if you're alone in it, if you've been pointing all the fingers, then that turns into despair. And the right really feeds on despair. So I don't know, that's something I want to bring in here. Adrienne talks about it often too, and like works with grief and politicizes grief and illustrates around grief. But our ability to get through the collective grief is going to take a lot more of us. Okay, so we're kind of like talking about what it is. We're pointing to what about this for white people and social justice movements is necessary.
Yeah.
I also want to see if there's anything else in there, anything else that feels real important around like call out culture in relationship to white folks in this political moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Erin, I really appreciate what you were saying about how there's a way we want to point away from our own behavior, right? So it's like, oh, you're doing that. And sometimes even the reason we're paying attention to it is because we've done it ourselves or we're still actively doing that. But there's something about that that's like, I don't want to be complicit in whatever you're doing, right? But I think the harder move and one that Grace and other elders, other ancestors are pointing us to is like, we have to take responsibility. What does it look like to take responsibility for what's happening? And that I think is it's like, I just want to cancel my racist family. I just want to cancel these people over here. I just want to cancel this racist executive director. I want to cancel whoever it is. And it's like, it doesn't address the fact that this is systemic. White supremacy is a system, and it's not something that can be taken down at an individual level, right? So anytime we find ourselves in that scenario where it's like, are folks still having a I'm like, how do I get louder? How about that?
Get in there.
Just
Gloria.
eat this microphone.
Eat the microphone.
Okay. I want to be heard. There's a massive thunderstorm happening that's like out of nowhere right above me. So, but it's also probably the feds. Okay. So the thing that, I see this behavior where it's like, oh, I want to push myself away from, rather than often when that instinct comes up to push away from, that's right when we need to move closer. It's like, oh, that's a piece of me. Like I can see it. I'm close enough to it to actually recognize it. How do we not push it away, but pull it in close? And I want to say something about whiteness. And, I'm a mixed race person. I grew up both in a Black and white cultural spaces. And I really feel like an intimate awareness of how whiteness is about exclusion. It's about division. It's about categorization, often with violence. It's about saying like this and not that, this and not that, this and not that. So I think there's a special need to be really careful with this practice, because this is a practice of saying us and not you, right? We and the us might get smaller and smaller and smaller, but these are the people who have their shit together. We're the innocent, good white people. And I'm like, how is that any different from what whiteness has been up to as an experiment all along that has caused so much harm, right? And then the people who get pushed out of that are like, I still have this white skin privilege, but now I've been pushed out of belonging, which then becomes a whole dangerous category. We see what white people pushed out of belonging do, which is shoot up everything. So it's really like a what do you call it? Tinderbox. Like it's like this really powerful, painful place. And I think it's both for white folks and for those of us who have white adjacent shaping. It's like a wider thing to be like, were you told that you have the right to create these divisions and to categorize other people as bad? Can you relinquish that idea of you being good and these other people being bad, and instead be like, we are living in the systems of this time. The systems of this time are all about dominance and hierarchy. And how do we put that practice down? What does it look like to put that practice down? I also want to say one thing about infiltration. because like whenever movements are massively successful, there's counter moves to infiltrate those spaces and take them down from within. And they always work. They always work, right? We're always like, I don't know what could be happening with these people causing all this. I'm like, we know what's happening. If someone shows up and all they're doing is focusing on destroying whatever's happening there, not contributing to how do we learn together, how to change this together? What does it look like to work with each other to co-create something that actually allows us to make these mistakes and unlearn this behavior? If the only move is I can lob a Molotov cocktail into the middle of this meeting, into the middle of this structure, into the middle of this organization, which if I was not doing that was having massive impact, we have to be much more discerning. We have to be much more cautious and not suspicious, but we have to be like, we have to organize those who want to do that kind of call out divisive shit. Like we need to get better at organizing. Cause I'm like, okay, can I radicalize your ass? Cause you're here in the room.
Yep. Yep, totally. I feel like I want to build on something you said, Adrienne, which is just like when those of us are white turn away, when we turn away from folks and do that separation. And I would love folks, I know the chat's not open, but like check in with yourself.
Yeah.
When someone said a thing, have you, more often than not, do you move in or do you move away? Because I know I've had times in my life where I'm like, this is my move instead of this.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm leaning in for folks, are we moving towards or away from? And I just think when we think about the bigger systems that we have to transform and destroy and recreate, what happens when we cede that territory and just continue to build on that? Like Adrienne said, like the right is doing that. And the right has a very intentional and well-resourced strategy for organizing white folks. They actually cannot maintain power without our people. For those of us who are white, they can't maintain power. And they know, I think Beth was quoted earlier, that they just can't stay in power. And they are door knocking. They have media empires dedicated to talking to people and helping white people make sense of the world and make meaning of what's happening. And so when we aren't doing that with our own folks, we give up on our own people, but it also fuels this larger political project that screws all of us in the end. And so, we have to have places where people can make mistakes, where people can find deep belonging and be transformed. And I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about making white people comfortable, which sometimes is like how that's read. There's a difference between creating belonging in spaces where people can transform. And that doesn't mean people are comfortable all the time, right? Or that's what the political project is. It's about creating places where people can, one of our elders and ancestors, Anne Braden, who was a white anti-racist woman from Louisville, Kentucky, talked all of the time about how white folks are constantly in a state of flux and could go one way or the other. And that our responsibility is to help people think in new ways and experience new things. And that we have to have an abiding faith that people are capable of transformation. Because if we don't, what are we doing? And if we don't, it's really hard. So we have to, I think part of our work is to cultivate and continue to pay attention to our belief, cultivate a belief that people can transform. Because, I did. And if you're on this call, you probably didn't wake up with the consciousness. You weren't born with the consciousness that you have that got you on this call tonight. So I think it's really important that those of us who are white, are really tapped into our humility about, we're just, that we're tapped into our humility. None of us are perfect. Perfection's not the goal anyways.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, we are moving, we're shaking. Everybody take a deep breath. Everybody feel their ass in their chair. Let this flow through you in a way that feels generative, that feels like, ooh, I want to chew on that. Ooh, I want to talk to my folks about that. And just feel in your heart or your gut or something much bigger than you, like, what is this conversation pointing us to, right? What's the gem that we need in this political moment to really take seriously, to shine, to integrate? So keep breathing. And I want to pivot us. So we've done a lot of context building. We're pointing out the forces that are actually pushing us back the other way, talking about what we need. And I want to talk, Erin, I'm going to go to you first. What does this look like at the organizational level? We're talking about a different way of being. And can you speak to how Surge is at least trying to practice that? How specifically are we trying to create a different kind of culture? And then I'll turn it to you, Adrian. You can riff or talk about movement or whatevs.
Cool. I think one thing that's really at the core of what we believe at Surge is an orientation to white anti-racism that is grounded in mutual interest and helping more white or shared stake, more white people get really clear about what our stake is in fighting and ending white supremacy. And to focus as much on that as we do on our privilege.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of reasons that we do that. It's grounded in a belief that white folks, yes, there are privileges awarded to us, though they are meted out differently. I want to, even within whiteness, and that's a whole other webinar. But there are also real costs, not the same that there are to communities of color, but there are also costs to white people in both material and spiritual ways, I would say. And that we do this work not from a place of helping communities of color, but really because we deeply believe that our own liberation requires it. That this is not, we're not doing this to help anybody else. This is about our own liberation. And, we've tried to get really crisp over the years about the ways in which white supremacy harms white communities in very material ways, right? So we know that there's, we can't have nice things because of white supremacy and racism for any of us. We see the ways in which whiteness rearranges our alliances for those of us who are poor and working class to whiteness, to white people at the top, to rich white people, as opposed to aligning with working class communities of color and, POC-led and Black-led movements who are fighting for a world that would benefit all of us in very material ways. We'd have healthcare, we would have strong public schools, we would have so many nice things if we could actually build a deep and enduring solidarity across lines of difference. So it harms us in really material ways. And then there's also deep spiritual costs to those of us who are white, right? Like we have to give up a lot to be white, right? Like I think of my own family, we had to give up our name. We had to give up our foods. We had to give up, our resiliency practices. There was a lot that we had to give up that harm us in not material ways, but really harm us in other ways that are much more about, our spirits. And so at Surge, we really think that this is how we create a culture that people will stay in when shit gets hard and fighting white supremacy is hard, because we really understand what's in it for us. And we really believe that our own liberation is tied to the leadership and the success of organizing led by communities of color. So I think that's like at the core of what we're trying to do at Surge. Yeah. Imperfectly, but yeah, that's at the core of it.
I really love that, Erin. This is part of why I fucks with Surge, because I feel like there's, for a long time, I remember pre-Surge, right? I remember for such a long time being like, God, I wish there was a space where white folks were talking to themselves and organizing themselves in a different way. I remember being so excited when Catalyst came along. I remember being so excited when Surge was born and being like, oh shit, y'all are going, like, this is what it needs to look like. And there's a fractal nature to it and it excites me. And there's this aspect of both political education and really getting nuanced. And I think I would add to that, Hillary, sorry, I promised I wasn't going to say that. Hillary Moore. One of the reasons I adore our friendship is because I feel like I'm constantly learning from you around like, what does it actually look like to broaden people's analysis inside of their identity? So the book you did, No Fascist USA, it's like broaden our analysis to this moment. It's not just about white supremacy is not acting in a vacuum. It's acting towards this larger vision of actually a fascist state. And we're barreling towards it. So if we can understand this moment was systemic and planned, and it's about whiteness, but it's also about hierarchy, right? And the hierarchy actually trumps the whole thing, right? That inside of whiteness, there's constant hierarchies being built. So broadening that analysis in whatever organizational space you're in, like you said, creating that space for people to be able to make mistakes and recover, right? What does it actually look like to understand that the mistake is the portal? When we fuck up, that's often the portal. That's when the most change is possible if we're held with compassion. And that often will deny the mistake first, right? When we see people called out, there's a protocol almost that they follow. It's like the grief protocol, right? It's like denial. This is not happening. I did not do it. It's not true. And then that's not what I intended, and so on and so forth, right? There's a pathway. If we know that, then we're like, okay, that's all part of your recovery from the mistake you made. We don't need to get stuck on any of those steps. We need to know that those steps are going to happen every single time. We need to discern. And in We Will Not Cancel Us, I made a list of discerning questions about whether we have enough information to actually make a call at all. Do we know if the survivor of harm is actually being supported? Do we know if there is a community that can support the person who has actually caused the harm? Like, do we have the capacity to hold this? Our organizational structures now, we need to stop being caught off guard by any of this. We need to expect that this is the wave of movement that we're in. So let's create the grievance policies. Let's create internal transformative justice policies so that we're like, oh, when this happens, we pull out Fumbling Towards Repair from Miriam Kaba and Shira Hassan, and we walk ourselves through a transformative justice process, right? I think there's also like being willing to go to the root. So for some of our organizations, we're scared to look internally because what happens is it's like a piece of dynamite is in our heart. So instead, if we create this space, and I know when I was at Ruckus, this is one of the things that I felt proudest of that we did was like, okay, hold on, let's make the space, stop blowing each other up, and let's make the space to actually turn and inquire what happened here. What are the roots of this organization? What are we willing to actually shift towards that end? What are we willing to practice? If we can't slow down and look, then people are going to start throwing stuff and being like, well, something's got to change. And this last piece is the least popular thing that I ever say to people, but also be willing to sunset something if it can't transform. Let it go, right? Not every organization that exists right now is necessary. Not every chapter of every organization is necessary. If all it is doing is exploding and causing harm, let it go. Find other places to plug into. Maybe instead of being a leader, you need to be a follower. You need to go volunteer in organizations where people of color are in leadership and like learn in that way. There's many ways to serve movement, and the consistent process of blowing each other up is actually not useful to movement right now. So those are some of my thoughts. Yeah.
I love this. These are all skills that we need, right? This is skills of transition. This is skills of collapse. This is skills of how we be together in a larger scale way that we haven't been taught, and we have to learn and relearn with each other. And we're going to need each other to figure that out. Yeah. And so cancel culture, call out culture is the antithesis of like building that whole new world, to put it very broadly, right? Yeah. I want to turn our attention to like, what are the moves that we need in this moment? And we've been already pointing to it. Yeah. Feel free to reiterate. Hearing things over and over again is really important when we're practicing new things. But what are the skills that we need to build a political home when we are organizing in white communities specifically, but also guess what? The left, we need to get better.
Period. I have 4 that I'll throw into this mix, okay? I have 4. So the first one I referenced earlier, but it's actually calling, actually reaching out, actually getting in contact with people. It's amazing to me how often, because I often will sit down with people who've gone through a call out process and be like, what happened? And how did you understand what was happening? Were you in denial? What's going on? And so often they're like, I didn't know until something was public, right? And then I found out that people had all these thoughts and assessments about me. We talk about in the somatic lineage, an assessment, like, is what you say showing up in how you are? And people are like walking around being like, oh, she's messed up. She's all fucked up. She says she's a white anti-racist, blah, blah. Okay. You need to tell people directly. You need to call people directly and be like, what you're doing is not actually aligned with who you say you want to be. And I'm willing to be in a conversation with you about what that could look like, right? That's the call. So that one, being willing to be in relationship with people that you want to see change, right? The second one is actually setting boundaries. So Prentice Hemphill teaches us what I now call the Hemphill method, which is boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and myself simultaneously. And what I find is we sometimes are using the public call out, call in, cancel thing because we are trying to set a boundary, right? We're like, I need a boundary here. Something's happening that is harming me or impacting me. And I'm like, you deserve a boundary. You absolutely deserve a boundary. You don't have to destroy someone else to get that boundary. Do need to set that boundary. And I wish, like in my dream world, our movement would like pause, go to an alternate universe, spend 5 years just learning about boundaries, and then come back. But we can't do that. So just pretend that happened. The third thing is Grace Lee Boggs again, transform ourselves to transform the world. And I literally, everyone on this call, I'm like, sit down and make a list of everything you have ever done that would have gotten you called out or canceled. Just sit down and make that list, right? Put down how old you were when it happened. How would it have impacted you if people came at you this way, right? This was not around. I know because I was like, I have made this list myself. And I thank the Lord every day that social media wasn't what it was when I was 18 and making my first mistakes, right? I couldn't have handled it psychologically. I don't know that I would have recovered and been a successful, impactful part of movement. And I think I'm very necessary. I'm so glad that people fought for me to transform myself, to transform the world. So get back in touch with your own humility around all this stuff and recognize that you still have work to do. If you think you don't have work to do, that's the work you need to most attend to, right? And then the fourth thing is actually be willing to heal. In The Salt Eaters by Toni Cade Bambara, she has this question, are you ready to be well? And I think for white people, sometimes there's like I'm ready to be ashamed. I'm ready to be apologetic for the rest of my life. I'm ready to crawl on my knees. You know, I'm ready to never be a whole human being. But that's not what we need from y'all. What we need from you is to be willing to heal all the way back into your dignity, beyond contortion, beyond shame, to be able to stand whole and say, yes, I'm a whole human being. I've made mistakes. I will make them, but I did not create this system. I'm responsible for dismantling it alongside of everyone else, right? That's what we need. That's the kind of partnership that will heal us. And if you're willing to heal, we can work with that, right? So those are my things.
Thanks, Adrienne. I'm going to keep building on that. I also had 4, but I'm going to go out of order here because what you just said, Adrienne, about like, we need you to heal, I would say, and then we need you to turn back to your folks and bring more of them along.
That's right.
I think we need to continue. We have to do our individual work. I mean, the two things are so intimately interconnected. And I think for too long, those of us who are white have defined anti-racism as the shame and the shame and the blame and the self-hatred. But we also, it stays at such an individual level, and we need to be thinking collectively, and that our responsibility is to bring more folks along with us when we are able to be more of our dignity. We need to bring more folks along. And so that can look like a lot of things. We're going to recruit you into it at Surge at the end of this call, but it can look like door knocking. It can look like phone banking, you know, talking to white folks in Georgia who the right is targeting every damn day. It can also look like having really hard conversations with the people around you, right? To shift them slowly over time.
Yeah.
So I think it's fundamentally, we have to be thinking collectively and about collective action that are targeting systems and structures as we are also doing our individual work. The two things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah. Erin, one thing I want to throw in as you say that too is sometimes there's something about supporting people who are going to do that work. Like I have extremely racist white family, and I don't feel safe in the interaction of going in to deal with them. But my mom goes and she's doing that work, and I have her back. I'm supporting her. Like my job is being in a political relationship with her to fortify how she's able to move into that space and what she's able to do there. And that is also a massive solidarity. It's important political work, and it changes our relationship all the time. And my mom doesn't think of herself as an organizer, but she absolutely is. And so I just want to offer that too, that it's like, there's so many ways to support people in the work. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I think about, I could go on that. There's just so many ways, because the folks doing that work do need a lot of care, support, backing. And that's not everybody's lane, you know. There's lots of care people on our phone bankers who are caring for the folks who are having those hard conversations, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. Hillary and I have had lots of conversations both ways around that. And when we've each been engaged in different kinds of work, how we support and flank each other. Um, and then I think there's a piece about growing. So this has already been named in other ways, but growing, it's actually like helping people transform. There's skills, concrete skills associated with that, right? Like we talked about having the skills to call people out of it, but we need skills to like help people sit through saying really ugly things and to be able to self-regulate through that. We need to be able to learn how to be very curious and sit in our own discomfort. We need to, there's like a whole range of skills that we need to actually be able to help people transform. It's not just something we wake up and know how to do. Some of us are socialized how to do it, and I think the third thing I want to lift up is just that we need to continue to remember that Adrian, you might have already said this, white people as individuals are not our enemies. It's the systems of white supremacy. And we need to be very rigorous about engaging in the hard and direct conversations we need to when harm does happen at the individual level or in an organization. And we need to be very clear about the ways in which whiteness is being used as part of a political project to maintain a very unjust status quo that harms all of us. And so continuing to turn our attention up at those who benefit most from white supremacy and from keeping us divided. So I think just being really rigorous around that is really, really important in these times.
Mm-hmm. Y'all, something that's striking me right now is like the moment within movement legacy, movement history, right? Like some of our, I'll say for like white anti-racist movements, we've been through some shit in terms of how we relate to white people. And ultimately being very small and expecting large impact hasn't really worked out before. Like we're actually trying to bring in millions more white folks into the strategy, into what is possible, into what we actually fucking need. And I want all of us who are part of groups, formations, organizations, just underlining what everybody's already talking about is like, can we be a commitment to something much larger than ourselves? Can we be a commitment to something that is also maybe even larger than our lifetimes and like right sizing ourselves in relationship to that? Just a few things I want to throw in is like, I've known that I've belonged when I'm used really well, not in an exploitative kind of way or whatever, but like when I'm like, oh, I have a place and I'm doing the thing that I have purpose around and I'm being used well. Do our organizations, do our campaigns do that for folks? That's an important question. Are people satisfied at the end of it? Do we celebrate and do we rejoice and like actually integrate our wins, whatever they might be? Y'all, we need a lot more satisfaction if we're gonna bring more people along. And I also want to put out that like, how can we create a culture, whether it's in our teams, in our organization, or in our movements, where we feel like this is the right place, right time? Right? Because if you only look externally, shit's on fire and what the hell is going on? But if we know how to position ourselves in this moment and we know that, okay, this is our fight and we need each other, it's a very different relationship. So let's also build like right place, right timeness and purpose within that. And I'm just wanted to open it up now. Like Adrian, what you got? Aaron, last comment.
Well, just one thing that, as you were saying that, I was like, there's also, I feel like there's wisdom, indigenous wisdom on this, right? And one of it is like looking 7 generations back, looking 7 generations forward, really thinking not just at this moment as what the whole world is, or this whiteness of this moment is the way whiteness has always been and operated. And one of the things I've always deeply respected, Hillary, about you is that you're like, my lineage is in Germany. I'm going to go back. I'm going to actually go understand and get in and explore that, right? And you actually contributed to how do we think beyond policing in Europe, right? And like, for me, I'm like, oh, right, because that's a lineage that you have. And we actually share that, right? I grew up half my life in Germany without knowing I had German lineage. And now I'm like, oh, wait, no, there's some German shit in there, Nigerian shit, there's all this stuff. There's something about how do we reclaim our cultural aspect of ourselves outside of this current tiny box construct way of looking at ourselves, and how do we project forward into a future in which whiteness doesn't even exist, but we are many, many cultures and many, many ways of being, and we're responsible for being in right relationship to the earth with all of that. And all of this will be a part of that and moving forward. So I often ask people that when folks are talking to me about whiteness, I'm like, where do you actually come from? What are the songs and practices of your people? Like, if you weren't told them, like, you know, or if you can only remember the most traumatic, horrific stuff that's happened in the past few centuries, reach back further, right? There's something that predates that for you, just like there's something that predates the trauma for me as a Black person. There is something beautiful back there, and there is something beautiful up ahead, and we are passing through the portal to get there. And in this moment, we just have to be so accountable to each other about that. And actually, we can't afford to lose anyone. We can't afford to lose anyone. So if you can't hold on to them, figure out who can, you know, but we have to hold on to each other, because this white supremacy thing is falling apart. And when it falls apart, when capitalism falls apart, it's going to be so awesome and so scary. And if we're not holding on to each other, we're really going to get lost in the maelstrom. But if we are holding on to each other, we're going to be the light that everyone has to turn towards and be like, oh, they're figuring it out. I want to be able to fit in. I want to be able to belong to something. And I'm like, great, because we're scholars of belonging. That's what we've been practicing. We don't throw people away here. Come on in. That's the kind of movement I want us to build. That's the kind of future I want us to build.
I got chills. I got chills.
Chills.
Oh, I want to keep threading the belonging,
Yes.
piece. It's like, not only do we belong to lineages and places that many of us don't know, we also don't often learn the lineages of white anti-racism that are
Yes.
there.
Exactly.
And Carla Wallace, who I think is on the call, one of the co-founders, says that we have always been there. Always too few of us and always imperfectly, but we have always been there.
Yes.
And that history is erased. We have to be really deliberate about seeking that out. And so if you're in a Surge chapter or you're one of a Surge members, like, that's something that we can lean back on. And it's a lineage we can be proud of, right? And that we know that we come from. And so I think the thing that really excites me is that we're positioned, there's more of us than there ever has been, and Surge wants to continue to be a place where literally millions of white folks can find deep belonging and choose another way of being, and choose solidarity and liberation. And so, yeah, we come from many lineages, and there are some of them that we can be proud of. And we want to make more of those white anti-racist ancestors.
Absolutely. This is fuel for the fight, right? It's out there, it's available, it's abundant, even like it's a renewable resource.
Yes.
Our histories, our culture, our ability to connect, we just actually have to use it, and also prioritize it. And so, Adrienne, will you close us out and kind of wrap us up in terms of
Totally. Well, I mean, I think the thing, my obsession is practice. Right. So it's great to think all these big thoughts. It's great to get inspired. But one of the things actually that is the most harmful behavior that white folks do is we get mad and we yell at the television and we talk about it and we, somebody should do something, and we don't actually get in our own practice. So the thing is, let's get in our own practice. Let's all get in our own practice here. And we have given you a lot of things you could practice. But I want to invite Grace back on, because I think that Surge has real resources on practices you can take out of this call to move forward. And I also want to say, one of those practices is to actually donate to and support organizations that are explicitly working on this. So Grace might be mentioning it, but donate to Surge, donate to Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, donate to organizations that are going head on at this problem at this moment, so that we can belong to each other in an abundant way.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Erin. Also, excuse me while I put my Scholar of Belonging hat on. We are all putting our Scholars of Belonging hat on. Right. So as Adrienne said, what's next? We are all here together in this webinar, and now it's time for us to do something about it. And as she said, to be in practice together. So the first thing is a fun thing, and it's to remind us that we are in practice literally together. And Adrienne said just a few minutes ago, come on in. And that's what we say at Surge really often. If you've been looking for us, we've been looking for you. So y'all, I know y'all are all on social media, because a lot of you were sharing this on Instagram. So I want you to take out your phones and take a selfie of yourself. And we're all right now going to hashtag come on in. and share your commitment to why you're in this fight for the long haul and who you're going to bring with you. And you can tag Serge, you can tag Adrienne Marie Brown. We'll reshare it on our profile. You know, you'll be Instagram famous. Just kidding. Who knows? So you're taking a photo of yourself and tagging "Come on in," and whether that's on Instagram or Facebook or wherever the kids are these days that I'm not, Twitter, you know, all your spaces, tag that, and then click on the hashtag and see who is here with us tonight. See who is here and what they're committing to. Because y'all, like, not to be that guy, but what's at stake is our collective futures. Like, we have fascism and authoritarianism on the rise for real, and the right is winning in a lot of ways. But I also learned from Grace Lee Boggs, we're just going to keep laying it on you, that in the midst of crisis, there is an opportunity. And we've talked on this webinar about opportunity at the small scale, which is ways that we can be in practice around calling in together in relationship to one another, and also on the large scale, how we're going to bring in literally millions of fucking white people into this movement of with belonging and their own shared stake to break the power of the right over white people, because it's strategic and also because it's sacred. Okay, so now it's time to get information. I'm going to throw in some Beyonce and to do some practice around what we've talked about tonight. So one way that we think about being in practice together at Surge is in this cycle of theory, action, and reflection. So it's important to know the movement theory. We take action together, and then we think about it and we do assessments. Think about what we were learning, how we're integrating, how we might do it differently next time. And so we're going to invite you into that process tonight. So in just a second, maybe it already happened. Yep, in just a second, we are dropping the link into the chat where you can find a roadmap of this theory, action, and reflection. So tonight it was the theory, you know, it was like the juiciest, most delicious theory you ever want to experience. And then in this document for your action bit, there's going to be a whole menu of ways that you can take action with Surge. And we want you to find 3 friends who will commit to watching this webinar with you and then taking action with you. And then part 3, we want y'all to commit to reflecting on the process together. What was coming up for you? Like, you know, calling people in Georgia made me feel nervous because blah, 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 you know, whatever it is. So this is the cycle. And one of the actions, as Adrienne shared, is going to be for you to donate to BOLD, the organization she mentioned, which is resourcing Black organizers to do this kind of transformative work. Here at Surge, we are always trying to support POC-led organizations who are leading the work and setting the agendas that we're flanking. Okay. That's my bit. The stakes are high. Are you guys with us? Let's turn the chat back on. Let's turn the chat back on, please, Ash. Let's give some love in the chat to our speakers. Share your commitment about how you are gonna invite people to come on in and make a bigger we here, bring in more and more white people into this work. Because it's the only way. It's the only way forward. And it is like also, it's the only way, but it's also the most beautiful way, I think. Speaking of beautiful, I'm going to choose one of the many Grace Lee Boggs quotes that's on my phone to share with y'all to close. And I'm going to find the tab that I had it pulled up in. 1 second. I should have it memorized, but of course I can't pull it up on a webinar. Okay. Here's Grace Lee Boggs for you to take into the rest of your evening. In the middle of catastrophe, in the middle of disaster, people, particularly people who have already suffered, see an opportunity to evolve to another stage of humanity. So in the midst of this crisis and catastrophe, we have this opportunity to evolve. And one part of this evolution is building this bigger we in a beautiful, more we full of belonging. So find the links, take action with us, join Surge. This is your home now. Come on in, hashtag come on in. And thanks for being with us tonight. We're so grateful for you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks, interpreters.
Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to our tech people. Thank you to our live streamers. Thank you to everybody on the back end that makes this possible. And thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. So beautiful to be here with you. And hosts and panelists, I'll drop a link for you if you want to debrief.
See you over there.
Bye, y'all. Be well.